You are listening to Bedtime Dreamy Tales. Share and subscribe our channel. Story title: The Little Mermaid, Part 2A, The Prince and the Sea. A large ship with 3 masts lay becalmed on the water with only one sail set, for not a breeze stirred. The sailors sat idle on deck or among the rigging. There was music and song on board, and as darkness came on, 100 coloured lanterns were lighted, making it look as if the flags of all nations waved in the air. The Little Mermaid swam close to the cabin windows. As the waves lifted her up, she could look in through clear glass window panes and see well-dressed people within. Among them was a young prince, the most beautiful of all, with large black eyes. He was 16 years old, and his birthday was being celebrated with much rejoicing. The sailors were dancing on deck, but when the prince came out of the cabin, more than 100 rockets rose into the air, making it as bright as day. The Little Mermaid was so startled that she dived under the water. When she again stretched out her head, it appeared as if all the stars of heaven were falling around her. She had never seen such fireworks before. Great suns spurted fire about, splendid fireflies flew into the blue air, and everything was reflected in the clear, calm sea beneath. The ship itself was so brightly illuminated that all the people, and even the smallest rope, could be distinctly and plainly seen. The young prince looked so handsome as he pressed the hands of all present and smiled at them while the music resounded through the clear night air. It was very late, yet the Little Mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship or the beautiful prince. The coloured lanterns had been extinguished, no more rockets rose in the air, and the cannon had ceased firing. However, the sea became restless, and a moaning, grumbling sound could be heard beneath the waves. Still, the Little Mermaid remained by the cabin window, rocking up and down on the water, which enabled her to look in. After a while, the sails were quickly unfurled, and the noble ship continued her passage. Soon, the waves rose higher, heavy clouds darkened the sky, and lightning appeared in the distance. A dreadful storm was approaching. Once more, the sails were reefed, and the great ship pursued her flying course over the raging sea. The waves rose mountains high, as if they would have overtopped the mast, but the ship dived like a swan between them and then rose again on their lofty, foaming crests. To the Little Mermaid, this appeared pleasant sport, but not so to the sailors. At length, the ship groaned and creaked. The thick planks gave way under the lashing of the sea as it broke over the deck. The mainmast snapped asunder like a reed, and the ship lay over on her side, and the water rushed in. The Little Mermaid now perceived that the crew was in danger. Even she herself had to be careful to avoid the beams and planks of the wreck that lay scattered on the water. At one moment, it was so pitch dark that she could not see a single object, but a flash of lightning revealed the whole scene. She could see everyone who had been on board excepting the prince. When the ship parted, she saw him sink into the deep waves, and she was glad because she thought he would now be with her. Then she remembered that human beings could not live in the water, so that when he got down to her father's palace, he would be quite dead. But he must not die. She swam about among the beams and planks that strewed the surface of the sea, forgetting that they could crush her to pieces. She dived deeply under the dark waters, rising and falling with the waves, until she managed to reach the young prince, who was fast losing the power of swimming in the stormy sea. His limbs were failing him, his beautiful eyes were closed, and he would have died had the Little Mermaid not come to his assistance. She held his head above the water and let the waves drift them wherever they would. In the morning, the storm had ceased, but of the ship, not a single fragment could be seen. The sun rose red and glowing from the water, and its beams brought back the hue of health to the prince's cheeks, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, smooth forehead and stroked back his wet hair. He seemed to her like the marble statue in her garden, and she kissed him again, wishing that he might live. Presently, they came in sight of land. She saw lofty blue mountains on which the white snow rested as if a flock of swans were lying upon them. Near the coast were beautiful green forests, and close by stood a large building. Whether a church or a convent, she could not tell. Orange and citron trees grew in the garden, and before the door stood lofty palms. The sea formed a little bay here, in which the water was quite still but very deep. She swam with the handsome prince to the beach, which was covered with fine white sand, and laid him in the warm sunshine, taking care to raise his head higher than his body. Then bells sounded in the large white building, and a number of young girls came into the garden. The Little Mermaid swam farther from the shore and placed herself between some high rocks that rose out of the water. She covered her head and neck with sea foam, so her little face might not be seen, and watched to see what would become of the poor prince. She did not wait long before a young girl approached the spot where the prince lay. The girl seemed frightened at first, but only for a moment. She then fetched a number of people, and the mermaid saw the prince come to life again and smile at those who stood around him. But to her, he sent no smile. He did not know that she had saved him. This made her very unhappy. When the prince was led away into the great building, she dived down sorrowfully into the water and returned to her father's castle. She had always been silent and thoughtful, and now she was more so than ever. Her sisters asked her what she had seen during her first visit to the surface of the water, but she would tell them nothing. Many evenings and mornings did she rise to the place where she had left the prince. She saw the fruits in the garden ripen until they were gathered, the snow on the mountain tops melt away, but she never saw the prince and returned home, always more sorrowful than before. It was her only comfort to sit in her little garden and fling her arms around the beautiful marble statue that looked like the prince. She gave up tending her flowers, and they grew in wild confusion over the paths, twining their long leaves and stems around the branches of the trees, so the whole place became dark and gloomy. The Little Mermaid could not forget the prince. She often went to the surface to watch the shore where she had left him, but she never saw him again. Her only comfort was to sit in her garden and wrap her arms around the marble statue, which reminded her of the prince. Her sisters noticed her sadness and tried to comfort her, but she told no one of her longing. The days passed, and her yearning for the human world grew stronger. The once vibrant garden where she spent her days became overgrown and wild as she neglected it, lost in her thoughts of the prince. One day, the Little Mermaid confided in one of her sisters about her love for the prince. The sister, moved by her tale, shared it with the others, and soon the secret was known to all five. They decided to help their youngest sister. They learned from a mermaid who knew the prince about his palace and where it stood. The five sisters took the youngest mermaid to the surface, close to the spot where the prince's palace was located. It was built of bright yellow shining stone with long flights of marble steps, one of which reached down to the sea. Splendid gilded cupolas rose over the roof, and between the pillars surrounding the building stood lifelike statues of marble. Through the clear crystal of the lofty windows could be seen noble rooms with costly silk curtains and hangings of tapestry, while the walls were covered with beautiful paintings that were a pleasure to look at. Knowing where the prince lived, the Little Mermaid spent many evenings and nights on the water near the palace. She would swim much closer to the shore than any of her sisters dared, even venturing up the narrow channel under the marble balcony, which cast a broad shadow on the water. Here she would sit and watch the young prince, who thought himself quite alone in the bright moonlight. She saw him many times in the evening, sailing in a pleasant boat with music playing and flags waving. She peeped out from among the green rushes, and if the wind caught her long, silvery white veil, those who saw it believed it to be a swan spreading out its wings. On many nights, when the fishermen were out at sea with their torches, she heard them recount tales of the young prince's kindness and bravery. This filled her heart with pride, knowing she had saved such a noble man. She remembered the night she had saved his life, how his head had rested on her bosom, and how she had kissed him. But he knew nothing of all this and could not even dream of her. The Little Mermaid grew more fond of human beings and wished more and more to be able to walk among them. Their world seemed so much larger than her own. They could fly over the sea in ships and climb the high hills above the clouds. Their lands, woods, and fields stretched far beyond her sight. There was so much she wished to know, and her sisters could not answer all her questions. So she turned to her old grandmother, who knew all about the upper world. If you like this story, please give this video a like. For more stories, go to bedtimedreamytales.com. See you in the next story.